Good morning, good afternoon and good evening again. Last week it struck me that the hottest topic of debate among you was not concerned with the modeling and simulation techniques that we presented to you. Instead, a lot of discussion revolved around the causes of privatization and unbundling in infrastructure systems. Why did so many countries embark on reforming their infrastructure sectors in the 1980s and 1990s? In my opinion, you should not look for a deeper cause than a paradigm shift in the prevailing economic thinking at the time. Following the US model, the UK was the first country in Europe to embark on infrastructure sector reform, soon followed by the rest of Europe. And it is interesting to notice that all countries started their reform efforts in the telecom sector, which is not surprising, as it is in this sector that new technologies enabled the emergence of new infrastructure networks. The copper-wired, plain old telephone system lost its natural monopoly status when competing networks came to the fore, making liberalization and privatization logical steps. In the past, when all customers were still captive users of the copper-wire telephone network, the government needed to intervene ex ante to protect public interests. Today, with a choice between different telecom providers, each operating their own network, the government role has changed to ex post regulation of the market. It will only intervene if the public interest is harmed by distorted competition in the market. In the telecom sector, it is clear that liberalization of the market has unleashed innovation. Customers are served better with new technologies and new services. For the government, privatization of the telecom sector was also attractive because it made the public funds invested in the network available for other use, while the responsibility for new investments in the telecom sector was shifted to the private sector. The argument of private investments in infrastructure and the promise of better service quality at lower costs were also thought to apply to other infrastructure sectors. However, in those other sectors, we do not have competing networks. We are still stuck with natural monopoly networks, which explains why the networks in, for instance, the energy sector had to be unbundled from other functions in the value chain where competition could be introduced. In these cases, some governments, such as the UK government, chose to privatize most of their infrastructure networks, whereas other governments chose to keep the networks in public hands. But in all these cases, regulation of the network functions is an absolute necessity to safeguard public values, including protection of the most vulnerable consumers. That brings me to the course material presented to you in week 5. It showed you how difficult it is to make public values operational. There are trade-offs to be made, but public values are dynamic and are not equally appraised by all actors involved. A sector-specific regulator, the regulator overseeing the operation of a monopoly network and the delivery of services over a monopoly network, typically is assigned with the tasks to ensure non-discriminatory access to the network and to ensure reliability and quality of service at affordable cost for the end users. Such a regulator is basically an economic regulator who will strive to achieve a social welfare optimum in assessing the network operator's plan for investments in maintenance, capacity expansion and innovation. In assessing the adequacy of investment and performance levels, benchmarking with other networks in the same sector comes in useful. However, benchmarking has its limitations, as different networks are never comparable in all respects. Take, for example, a water distribution network in a densely populated urban area and a water distribution network in a rural area. You will understand that in the rural case, the average network length per customer will be much longer and therefore the capital intensity of the network much higher than in the urban water distribution network. And the same will be true for electricity and natural gas distribution. This is one of the reasons why benchmarking must be used with caution. Furthermore, as Professor Van Michem shows, certain performance characteristics of networks are embedded in the network structure, which cannot easily be changed, as it has generally evolved over decades. And if more than one service is provided over one and the same network, as in the multi-utility case shown by Rudy Hackford, the regulator's task is even more challenging, as he must prevent cross-subsidization between regulated and commercial service delivery. Regulation of the safety and quality of infrastructure construction works requires different expertise and usually resides with another regulatory body. As Martin de Jong showed, such a regulatory body may be able to trace and penalize direct causes of unsafe construction, but it is powerless when it comes to the perverse incentives that lead to unsafe construction practices. It is the government that defines the context, and if the government does not create the conditions for safe and skilled construction practices, then catastrophes such as the one in Hangzhou can occur. During the discussion in week 4, some of you claimed that the government is the weakest link in the provision of infrastructure services, and I'm afraid that you are right. Another flaw in the present landscape of liberalized and non-liberalized infrastructure functions is concerned with the interconnectedness and interdependencies between infrastructures. All the ex-ante infrastructure regulation that we have is infrastructure specific. In, for example, the energy sector, the regulator looks at investments in the gas infrastructure only within the context of the gas infrastructure, and it assesses investments in the electricity infrastructure only within the context of the electricity infrastructure. In other words, there is no regulation of the energy system as a system of interconnected energy infrastructures. Thus, it comes as no surprise that regulation of interdependencies across infrastructure sectors is also missing. According to Professor Pérez Arriaga, regulation at a cross-sectoral level would not be a good idea, since good regulation requires such a deep level of technical understanding that it can only be adequate at a sector-specific, even infrastructure-specific level. In this respect, I would like to point out a relevant and recent development in the UK, where just in March this year, a cross-sectoral regulators network has been launched. And the network is tasked with improving coordination across regulated sectors. It aims to improve the consistency of economic regulation across sectors and improve the efficiency of regulation. The first areas of focus for this UK regulators network will include facilitating efficient multi-sector investment projects, assessing cross-sector resilience, and developing a clear understanding of the overall affordability of regulated services for consumers. One of you pointed out another flaw in the system, the flaw of regulatory capture, in the context of the issue of net neutrality in the US. Here again comes the government into the picture as the weakest link. Unless the regulator is really independent, in the sense that it is protected from political preferences and private company interests, the safeguarding of public interests by the regulator is questionable, if not impossible. In Europe, the net neutrality battle has just been won by the European Parliament, with the recognition of the Internet as a common carrier for all, so the possibility for wealthy clients to reserve fast lanes on the Internet has been rejected. Last but not least, during the discussion in week 4, many of you touched on the interests of the poorest consumers. Their interests are not well protected in many countries, and universal access to essential infrastructure services is still far from being reality today. As Professor Pérez Arriaga pointed out in his interview in week 5, universal access cannot be achieved without some form of subsidy. In developed economies, where universal access is now a fact, it was usually accomplished by a surcharge on the service delivered to urban customers in order to pay for the infrastructure investment needed to connect rural customers. In other words, a form of cross-subsidization. And this illustrates that the regulator's role in a developing economy is different from its role in a developed economy. And here once again you see the importance of government. Government decides which public values are to be given priority. And it is government that mandates the economic regulator with the power to achieve the government's intentions, which necessarily change as the economy develops. I hope you are still enjoying the course. Week 6 is approaching, and I'm already looking forward to your issue papers. Remember that the best 2 papers will be awarded, so keep going.